What if I told you that one of the most beloved figures of Christmas might have its roots in an ancient heresy, one that Jesus himself condemned? It's a pretty wild idea, right? Well, today, we're going to explore a really fascinating argument that connects the dots between a group called the Nicolaitans and, you guessed it, the modern-day Santa Claus.
Okay, so let's start right here with this incredibly powerful and direct statement from the book of Revelation. What's so crucial to get is who Jesus is talking to. He's not pointing a finger at some outside enemy, like the Roman Empire. No, this is a doctrine, a teaching that was operating inside the early church. That's a huge deal.
So this naturally leads us to a couple of pretty big questions, doesn't it? First, who were these Nicolaitans anyway? And second, what in the world could they possibly have in common with Santa Claus? It seems like a stretch, I know. But let's dive in and see what the source material lays out for us.
All right, first things first. To even begin to understand the connection that's being made here, we've got to get to know this group, the one that drew such incredibly strong condemnation. The name itself is actually a massive clue. If you look at the original Greek, Nicolaitan breaks down into two parts. You have Níkē, which means victory or conquest, and then you have Laos, which means the people or the laity. So when you put them together, the name literally means conqueror of the people. Pretty intense, right?
And that name, Conqueror of the People, really describes the spirit of their whole doctrine. It was all about building a system, right? A system that puts a ruling hierarchy over your own personal conscience. One that demands you submit to their authority instead of having a genuine personal obedience to God. And ultimately, it prioritized the religious system itself over actual personal holiness.
And it doesn't stop there. Early church history gives us even more clues. We know three really key things about them. So first, they claim to have legitimate authority, tracing their roots all the way back to one of the first deacons. Second, they were all about promoting moral compromise, especially with the pagan cultural practices of the day. And third, and this is a big one, they basically taught that you could have it both ways. You could serve God while still participating in all these worldly systems. They just sort of spiritualized sin away.
So, here's the absolute crucial point to grasp. The Nicolaitan spirit wasn't some attack from the outside. It was a corruption growing from within. That was the whole game. They used their cover of legitimacy to normalize things that were completely fundamentally opposed to the core beliefs of the faith.
Okay, so hold that thought. We're going to make a pretty hard pivot now to a figure who seems, at first glance, completely unrelated to any of this. The historical 4th century bishop, Nicholas of Myra. And this is where we see this really fascinating transformation unfold over centuries. So you start with the historical Nicholas, a generous Christian leader, right? But then, slowly but surely, his story starts to get blended with other traditions. You've got elements from the Roman festival Saturnalia getting mixed in. Later on, bits of Germanic and Norse folklore, like the idea of Odin as a gift-giving sky traveler. They all get absorbed into the legend of St. Nicholas.
Fast forward to the 19th century, and boom, the transformation is complete. The figure we know as Santa Claus isn't really a Christian saint anymore. He's a totally new being. Think about it. He's got these godlike attributes. He sees all, he judges your behavior, and he gives out rewards based on your works, not on grace. And here's the kicker. He becomes the central figure of the very holiday that's meant to celebrate the birth of Christ.
And this right here is the absolute core of the argument from our source material. The idea is that this wasn't just some random, harmless, folksy evolution. No, this was a gradual but very definite replacement of core Christian beliefs with a substitute, a more culturally palatable, mythological substitute.
Okay, so now we're at the point where these two seemingly separate histories, the Nicolaitans and Santa Claus, are brought together to reveal what is argued to be one single overarching pattern. So let's look at this side-by-side comparison, because it's pretty striking. On the left, you have the traits of the ancient Nicolaitans. On the right, the modern Santa tradition. See how it maps? A claim to holy authority becomes a wholesome tradition. Mixing holiness with paganism becomes mixing Christ's birth with myth. And maybe the most pointed comparison of all, a doctrine that operated inside the church is marred by a tradition celebrated inside Christian homes.
The argument is that the underlying spirit, it's the same. In both cases, you have a system being put in place that replaces genuine, heartfelt obedience to God with a substitute, and it's a substitute that can be managed, controlled, and of course, made much more acceptable to the broader culture.
So, you might be asking, okay, so what? Why does this comparison matter so much? What are the stakes here?
Well, to answer that, we have to go back to the gravity of that original condemnation we started with.
I mean, think about the language Jesus used. It wasn't mild at all. He didn't say, hey, be cautious of these guys, or I kind of dislike what they're doing. No, the word he chose was hate. That's a term of extreme opposition, and it's reserved for something that is in total, complete contradiction to his very nature and his kingdom.
So why such a strong reaction? Well, according to this interpretation, the danger is actually profound. A system like this, it trains people, especially kids, to accept a counterfeit version of righteousness, one that's based on works and, let's be honest, surveillance. He sees you when you're sleeping. It subtly, quietly replaces the person and the role of Christ with a totally different, more worldly ruler figure.
So the argument goes, this isn't just harmless. It's not just a cute cultural tradition. In its very structure, in its very function, it becomes a form of discipleship. It's teaching allegiance and obedience to another authority, to another Lord.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. We're left with one final and pretty provocative thought about how this ancient spirit might still be operating in our world today.
The core assertion is this: that spirit of conquering the people, of subduing the laity by mixing real faith with more palatable cultural traditions, it never actually went away. It just adapted. It changed its appearance for a new era. It traded in its ancient religious cloaks for a modern, festive costume.
And so, ultimately, this leaves us with a really challenging question for all of us to think about. When a church or a family embraces a cultural tradition, where's the line? When does it cross over from just being harmless fun and become a kind of spiritual substitution? When we say, oh, it's just tradition, have we ever stopped to ask ourselves if Jesus might say something different?